In the last section, we went through and talked about how to factor with the greatest common factor. So for example, if I have 4x squared minus 12x plus 16, I can look for a common factor, right? Between 4, 12, and 16, it would be 4. They don't all have x's, so I don't include an x in my common factor. So I'm going to take out the 4. That'd leave me with x squared. 12 divided by 4, 3. 16 divided by 4. Okay, so we factor with the greatest common factor. Well, that works some of the times. Like some polynomials can be factored with the greatest common factor, and you end up with this monomial out in front. Sometimes, though, you cannot factor with the greatest common factor, so we need some other tools in our tool bag, and that's what we're doing right here. So I'm going to start out, I just want to review really quick. I want you to take this x plus 3 times x plus 7 and multiply it out. So pause the video and do that, and then you can compare with what I get. Right, so we take the x and distribute it through. Take the 3 and distribute it through. Combine those like terms. So this is not factoring, right? This is multiplication. But what I want you to do is to look at our answer down here and compare it to what we started with, because this is actually the factored form, right? That times that equals the x squared plus 10x plus 21. And so this is the factored form of x squared plus 10x plus 21. So we want to work backwards to get from here back up to there. So think about what we did there. So where did the x squared come from? Well, the x squared came from timesing the x and the x together. Where did the 21 come from? That came from timesing the 3 and the 7 together. And then where did the 10x come from? Well, if I look up here, right, I want 7x and 3x. I added them together. So really it's a 3 plus 7, right? 3x and 7x. I added them together. That gave me my middle term. So again, x squared, x times x, 21, 3 times 7, and the 10 came from adding those two together. So we're going to kind of use that that backwards thinking to try to factor this. So here's a problem. I have x squared plus 7x plus 12. I want to find out then, I want to work backwards to get, to figure out what the factored form is. It turns out that if you have a quadratic trinomial, quadratic because the highest power is a 2, and a trinomial because it has 3 terms, if it's going to factor, it's going to factor to be 2 binomials, right? That's a binomial and that's a binomial. So I do my 2 sets of parentheses. I'm going to put a binomial in each of those. Okay, I start with the first 2. That times that has to give me the x squared. Well, that's got to be x and x. That and that, when I multiply it, has to give me the 12. Well, to get 12, there's actually several different things I could multiply. It could be a 1 and a 12. Right, 1 times 12 is 12. It could be a 2 and a 6. Or it could be a 3 and a 4. I think those are all the pairs of factors that give you 12. Well, I have to figure out which one of those would give me the 7x. Well, if it's 1 and 12, if I put a plus 1 and plus 12, when I times those, remember how the 7x and the 3x, the 7 and the 3, right, added up to be 10? I need these factors to add up to be 7. So 1 and 12 don't work, 2 and 6 is 8, 3 and 4 adds up to be 7. So I'm going to put a plus 3 and a plus 4 in there. So another question is, how do I know if I did it correctly? Well, we're just going to multiply that out, right? So we're going to go, distribute the x through, x squared plus 4x plus 3x plus 12. X squared plus 7x plus 12, which is what we wanted. So this x plus 3 times x plus 4 is the factored form of x squared plus 7x plus 12. So really quick, just to review that, right? I knew it was x and x because of the x squared. I knew it was a 3 and a 4 because of the 12. Now with the 12, it could have been 1 and 12 and 2 and 6 also. I looked for the one that added up to be 7, and that's how I knew it was the 3 and the 4. Okay, so there's my factored form. So this only works in certain cases, right? When it's a quadratic trinomial. quadratic, highest power is 2, trinomial, it's got 3 terms. Okay, and that's what we're working on today, is we're factoring quadratic trinomials, and they'll end up being a binomial times a binomial. So here's the pattern here. If you want to look at this, it says, oops, sorry about that. It says if I have x squared plus bx plus c, it will factor to be x plus p and x plus q, right? And when I times those two, right, when I times them, it has to equal the last number right there. When I add them, when I take the p plus q, it has to add up to be the middle number right there. So the example they have down here, x squared plus 6x plus 5. Right, what do I times to get 5? So 1 and 5. That adds up to be 6. 1 plus 5 is 6. Now notice you could also do it with a minus. If I do a minus 1 times a minus 5, when I times those, I still get a positive 5, but when I add them, I get a negative 6 or a minus 6 back there. All right, let's try this one right here. So I have x squared plus 10x plus 16, and I want to write it in its factored form. Make sure you still check for a common factor, right? That's the first, that's the way we factored last time. So x squared plus 10x plus 16, there is no common factor. Now recognize that it's a quadratic trinomial. My highest power is a 2, and it's got 3 terms. If it's a quadratic trinomial and it's going to factor to be 2 sets of parentheses. Okay, how do I get the x squared? Got to have an x and an x there. When I times those two together, I have to get a positive 16. So let's make a list. I could times 1, it could be a 1 and a 16, or a 2 and an 8. 3 doesn't, 4 and 4, and we're done there. Now, to figure out which one of those it could be, I've got to look at the middle term. When I add those two together, it has to add up to be 10. So that tells me it's the 2 and the 8. So plus 2 and plus 8. So if you look at this, 2 times 8 is 16. 2 plus 8 is 10. It gives me that middle term right there. There's my factored form. I'm going to change number 1. Let's change it just a little bit. I'm going to write it as being x squared minus 7x plus 6. Let's do it with a minus instead of a plus. Okay, thought process. Number 1 thing, is there a common factor? Or not one. Second thing, is it a quadratic trinomial? And yes, it is. So as soon as I see it's a quadratic trinomial, I'm going to do my 2 sets of parentheses. Just think backwards. What do we multiply together to get x squared? Okay, when I times those two together, this is a little bit tricky. I have to get a positive 6, but they have to add up to be a negative 7. Well, if I do 2 and 3 and 1 and 6, this one adds up to be a positive 7. So how would I make it add up to be a negative 7? Well, when I multiply 2 numbers and get a positive 6, it could be a positive times a positive, but it could also be a negative times a negative. So if it's going to add up to be a negative 7, it's got to be the negative times a negative. So right there, when I times those, I get a positive 6. When I add them, I get a negative 7. So it's going to be a minus 1, minus 6. Just check it out. There's my x squared times the x by minus 6, minus 6x, minus 1x, plus 6. And those two right there, when I combine them, I get to my minus 7. Okay, I want you guys to try this one. So pause the video, factor this x squared plus 9x plus 8. It's a quadratic trinomial, so I'm going to do my 2 sets of parentheses. Now we're just thinking backwards. I know that times that has to give me x squared. I know that times that has to give me 8. Make your list. I know a lot of you can figure this out without making the list. If you're ever stuck, make the list. A lot of times I'll go to help someone and they're like, I can't figure it out, but they haven't made the list. This is just a step where you can kind of organize your thoughts and make sure you get all the factors. So with 8, it could be a 1 and an 8, or it could be a 2 and a 4. And those are the only pairs of factors that give you 8. I know they're both positives because they have to add up to be a positive. All right, so which ones add up to be my middle term? It's a 9x, so that would be that one right there. So it's plus 1 plus 8. Okay, they times them, get 8, add them up to be 9. There's my factored form. Let's see. Well, let's just do this last one over here. Let's do this x squared minus 8x plus 12. So two sets of parentheses, x and x. I want to multiply two numbers to get 12. They have to add up to be a negative 8. Well, to add up to be a negative, they've got to both be negatives, right? A negative times a negative is a positive, but they add up to be a negative. So I'm going to do a negative 1, negative 12, negative 2, negative 6, negative 3, negative 4. I want the ones add up to be negative 8. It's going to be that pair right there. So x minus 2, x minus 6. Now, all the ones we've done so far, that last number has been a positive. Let's think about what would happen, like if we want that last number to be, if that last number is a negative. So let's just kind of think this through. So I've got c squared minus 8c minus 20. It's a quadratic trinomial. So I'm going to do my two sets of parentheses. When I it's got to be c and c. When I multiply the last two numbers, it has to give me a negative 20. All right, just think about that for a second. If I'm going to multiply two numbers and I get a negative, that means those have to have opposite signs. One has to be a negative and one has to be a positive. So when I make my list, I'm going to make a list of factors, pairs of factors that have opposite signs. So I could do negative 1 and 20, and you could be really methodical about this, right? Does 1 go into it? Does 2 go into it? Does 3 go into it? So 2 goes into it 10 times. 3 does not go into it. Check 4. 4 does. And then now I'm back to 5. I got a 5 over here, so I'm done. Those are all the possible things I can multiply together to get negative 20. Now, if I add these up, those two give me a negative 19. This one right here gives me a positive 8. Well, I don't want a positive 8. I want a negative 8. But just think for a second. If I change this to a plus 2 and a minus 10, now when I times them, 2 times negative 10 is still a negative 20. But now that I add them, now I get a negative 8. So sometimes you might have to flip those signs. If you flip the signs, you'll still get your negative up here, but it will flip the sign of that number right there. Okay, so I found the combination that when I times them, give me a negative 20. They have to have opposite signs. But when I add them, give me a negative 8. So it's a plus 2 minus 10. And there's our factored form. So that's your next pattern. And I don't know that you need to write this down. I guess if you want to, you can. But here's kind of the summary. If C is negative, right? If C is negative, that means these two, P times Q, those two, P and Q, have to have opposite signs, right? Because I multiply them to get C. And if C is negative, they have to be opposites. And then when I add them, this middle number B could be positive or negative. If I go back up to that example, right? If this were a plus 8, then I'd want a negative 2 and a positive 10, right? Because now I get negative 20 still, but when I add them, I get a positive 8. So that middle number can be positive or negative, just depending on which factor is larger, 10 or negative 2. All right, so let's just try one more example. I want you guys to try this one right here. I want you to factor x squared plus 4x minus 21. So pause the video, give that a try, see if you can figure it out, and then you can unpause it and we'll go through it together. So it's a quadratic trinomial. As soon as I see that, I'm doing my two sets of parentheses. Just think backwards. Something times something gives me x squared, x and x. That times that gives me negative 21. So I'm going to make my list off to the side. If it's a negative 21, that means my pair of factors, they have to have opposite signs. So I'm just going to start with 1, do negative 1 and 21. 2 doesn't go into it. Negative 3 and 7. 4 doesn't. 5 doesn't. 6 doesn't. I'm already back to 7. Okay, I want the one that adds up to be a positive 4. Okay, well this time negative 3 plus 7, that adds up to be a positive 4. So I've got it. So this is just x minus 3 and x plus 7. A really common error that I see is we mix up those signs. We have an x plus 3 and an x minus 7. When I times those, I still get a negative 21, but now they add up to be a negative 4. So if you ever add them up and get the wrong sign in the middle, just flip those two, right? That's not it. We want it to be a minus 3 and a plus 7. All right. Here's a couple of examples. Let's just have you try one. Let's do one final one. So let's pick one out of here. Let's do Let's do this one right here, number 5. So one last final one. Pause the video. This is a mix of all of them. So pause the video, decide what your signs are going to be, and try to find the pair of factors that works so that we can get that factored. All right, so I know it's a quadratic trinomial. Do my 2 sets of parentheses. 24 off to the side. Okay, list your pairs of factors. I want them to add up to be, when you multiply them, you get a positive 24. Put an X and an X there. That means that it's got to be either 2 negatives or 2 positives. Well, it adds up to be a negative 14. That means it's got to be 2 negatives. So I'm just going to start with 1. I'm going to be methodical. Negative 1 and negative 24. 2 goes into it 12 times. 3 goes into it 8 times. This has a lot of pairs of factors. 4 goes into it 6 times. 5 doesn't, and then we're back to 6, so we're done. All right, I want the ones added up to be negative 14, and that is right there. Minus 2 plus minus 12 is a minus 14. So minus 2, minus 12, there's our factored form. I'll put the rest of these answers up here, so if you want to try some, you can, and then you can just check your answers. So give me just a second. All right, so there's all the solutions to all these problems. So if you want to try some and just double check and make sure that you've got it. Honestly, I think these can be kind of fun. Maybe it's just my math teacher nerdiness that's coming out here. But I think these problems can be kind of fun. It's kind of like a puzzle, right? Factors are the last number that add up to be the middle number, and you're just trying things, making your list of combinations until you find the one that works. So, all right, thanks, guys.